But this week we've been talking about Jesus' last words, some of those things he said at the very last moments of his life. Today we're looking at a part of his story written by his best friend, actually, John. It's in John chapter 19. And it's almost this sort of beautiful, very human interlude in the midst of a painful, agonizing story, really. Here's Jesus at this moment, just moments away from his own death. And there's people there that he loves most gathered there to see his execution. And among them would have been his mother Mary and his best friend John. And I guess I love this moment because it's so very human. You see Mary and John, they loved Jesus not just because he did miracles or because he was a great teacher or a prophet or even the Messiah. They loved him because he was a son and a best friend. And it's perhaps for them their most darkest experience of their life, the darkest moment for them. And Jesus looks down at them and he says first to Mary, he says, "Woman, here is your son," referring to John. And then he looks at his best friend John and says, "Here is your mother." And John tells us, he's the one who tells us the story, and John tells us that from that time forward, he takes Mary home and moves her into his house with him to care for her. It's a beautiful, intimate moment. The language that Jesus used is quite similar to the language of adoption at that time, the words that would have been used in a contract to create a new family. And so it's a powerful, beautiful experience to see this in Scripture and to see the very humanity of Jesus and the people who experience this. But in addition, there's something I think even more powerful happening. You see, Jesus taught the disciples for 3 years before he was crucified. He taught the people who followed him and people who were interested. And there's a story in Mark chapter 10 where we see Jesus is teaching about what it would take to follow him and what would be required to really live life his way. And we see that it must have been really, really challenging. It must have been so hard to hear because the response of the disciples, the people who knew him best, Peter sums it up in Mark chapter 10 in sentence 28. And he says, "Jesus, we've left everything to follow you. We've left it all, Jesus." And Jesus responds with this promise. In sentence 29, what he says is, "Truly I tell you, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age." You see, Jesus makes this promise to the disciples that no matter what you've sacrificed, no matter what you've had to leave behind, the promise is that there will always be a new family, that he will always, and not just a new family, but 100 times what you've lost, he will restore. 100 times what you've had to leave behind, what's been taken from you will be restored. Now, I have to be honest, this passage resonates with me more than probably many in the Bible because I've lived all over the world and I've often been far away from my own family. And while my family and I love each other very much, I can say with all sincerity that there have been many a night when my own prayers have been filled with those exact words. "Jesus, I feel like I've had to give up everything to follow you. I feel like I've had to leave it all behind to do the things that you've asked me to do." And so it encourages me to be reminded of these words from Jesus, this beautiful, intimate moment between a family of Jesus, a son, saying, "Here's a new family." And Jesus does that in our darkest moments, in the most difficult points of our lives. He creates a family for us. I've seen that and experienced that so many times, whether I was living in China or England or Southern California, wherever I've been around the world, I always find that in those hard, difficult moments, when I look around, I'm surrounded by family. And it reminds me that this is what it means to follow Jesus. One, there's hope and encouragement that even on the hard days, we're surrounded by a family who's going to journey with us. But two, that I have a responsibility to be a family, to look around me and to say, who needs a sister, who needs a mother, who needs a friend, who needs someone to draw them in and say, "Hey, you're one of us. It's going to be okay." That's what it means to follow Jesus. He creates a family for us where none existed before.
If you'd like to read this story about Jesus from the Bible, then you just need to follow the link that's in the description below this video. And if you'd like to discover more about Jesus, what it means to follow him, being a Christian, or church life, then why don't you drop us an email at the address below.